Hast du irgendwie mitgemacht? Ah, nein. Oh Gott.
Deswegen kann man immer schon verstehen, dass man nur das
Ich weiß gar nicht, ob ich es richtig verstanden habe gestern, dass Obmann das Jahr
ich weiß nicht, wer der ist eigentlich, aber ja, das war schon bei diesem Filmvorfilm. Dann, nee,
vorher, aber vor
der Filmvorfilm.
Vor dem Publikum.
Genau, ja.
Da muss man schon sehr sicher sein.
Ja.
Was willst du da sein? Das ist aber dann auch so ein bisschen gemein.
Ja.
Das ist.
Если кому-то нужен перевод с английского на русский, пожалуйста, возьмите там.
Я преимущественно искать.
Пожалуйста, если вам нужен перевод с английского, там можно взять наушники. Нет, но мы его просим запомнить, если можно. Можно еще один?
Добрый вечер, спасибо большое, что пришли. Мы рады приветствовать вас на фестивале, 9-м фестивале «Зеленого документального кино», в рамках которого сегодня проходит лекция, которая называется «Нон-Фикшн», и мы поговорим про гринвошинг с писательницей из Германии Кэтрин Хартман, которая к нам сегодня приехала. Думаю, что будет очень интересно. Лекция будет на английском языке, поэтому кому нужен переводчик, можете взять его там, если у кого-то еще нет. И наслаждайтесь. После лекции будет серия вопросов-ответов. Что присоединитесь.
Можно маленький комментарий, когда будете задавать вопросы, пожалуйста, только в микрофон, так как идет синхронный перевод.
So good evening. Is this on? No, it's on. That's the difference, right? Thank you very much for invitation. Also, thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for the translation. As a journalist, I'm concerned with that subject of greenwashing for 10 years now. So to me, it's very familiar, but I would be interested, are you familiar with the term greenwashing and what's behind it as well? Is this, you know about greenwashing? Otherwise, I would explain. So I'm a journalist. I live in Munich. I wrote my first book about greenwashing. It was called in English End of Story Time, and the latest work I did on that subject was a film together with the Austrian director Werner Bothe. It's called The Green Lie. It's screened in this festival, so I also wrote a book on that, and I will give you some examples what's behind green lies and greenwashing. So I start with some quotes, And maybe you can take a guess who is responsible for this quote. There is no business strategy that justifies poverty or climate change. Climate change plays an important role because it's the poor who suffer from the changes in temperature. A company must make a positive contribution to society. Why else would it exist? Why else would people allow it to exist? If a company cannot explain what it does to help others, the first thing it should ask itself is what it is for. So those are really beautiful words. They just sound like they might be sentences from the environmental encyclical of Pope Francis, but they are from a businessman, and his name is Paul Polman. He is the head of the Unilever food company. In fact, the media were celebrating this Paul Polman as the Messiah, actually, because when he took office in 2009, when he became head of CEO of the food company Unilever, he announced a green miracle. He promised by 2020 he would double the company's turnover and at the same time halve its ecological footprint, improve compliance with human rights, and buy 100% of all agricultural products sustainably. So to believe that this would even be possible, you really would need a strong belief. Because to double sales, Unilever has to sell even more processed food, for example, soup, ice cream, shower gel, and logically would need much more problematic raw materials. Because for its 170 billion products sold worldwide, Unilever processes around 8 million tons of such raw materials every year, for which about half of the world's forests are destroyed, mainly palm oil, soy, and beef. Unilever, in fact, buys the highest amount of palm oil of all consumer good companies in the world, 1.5 million tons per year. And the monocultures alone, which satisfies Unilever's palm oil hunger, grow twice as large as the island of Tenerife, mainly in Indonesia and Malaysia. Palm oil is the world's best-selling and cheapest vegetable fat. It is in every second supermarket product and it's added to biofuels. Indonesia is the world's largest producer of palm oil, with oil palm plantations growing almost 4 times the size of Switzerland. And for those huge monocultures, an area of rainforest almost the size of Germany was cut down and burned. Indigenous people and farmers were violently expelled and orangutans are almost exterminated. There are therefore 5,000 land conflicts only in Indonesia, and the company Wilmar International, which is the hugest palm oil company in the world, is involved in at least 100 such violent land conflicts. For many years, NGO has been proven that this corporation is responsible for deforestation, for land grabbing, illegal deforestation, and human rights violation in Indonesia. But in fact, this company, Wilmar International, is the main palm oil supplier to Unilever, who wants to save the world. So Unilever claims to purchase only sustainable palm oil, and this is a very good example for greenwashing and green lies. Also, we show our trip. We had a trip, filming trip to Indonesia for our film, where we were investigating the influence of Unilever, for example, in Indonesia on the forests. What does Unilever do to claim itself green? How does this greenwashing really work? What do they do to claim themselves sustainably? So Unilever, along with the World Wildlife Fund, which is one of the most famous and one of the hugest environmental NGOs in the world, those NGO and the palm oil industry, together with Unilever, founded the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. So this is a multi-stakeholder initiative, shortly called RSPO, and this is a a very clear example for how this industry is washing itself green by just protecting its own profits and interests. So there are more than 1,500 full members on this roundtable, and of this more than 1,500 members, there are more than 700 consumer good companies, 170 palm oil producers, more than 500 palm oil processors, more than 60 retail groups, and 14 banks and investment companies on this roundtable. Those include Bayer, Cargill, Credit Suisse, Mars, McDonald's, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, and Walmart, as well as highly controversial palm oil companies such as Wilmar International, the main supplier of Unilever. There are only 50 NGOs sitting on that table, and those are most of them are huge zoological societies or large Western conservation organizations such as WWF or Rainforest Alliance, which in turn are criticized very much for their cooperation with huge multinationals. It's always a Unilever manager who is director of this RSPO, of this roundtable on palm oil, and another director, the managing director, is one of a palm oil company called United Plantations. So it's very clear who has the say and who has the power in this roundtable on sustainable palm oil that claims to only sell environmentally friendly palm oil and socially just palm oil. But on the other hand, it comes as no surprise that the RSPO criteria, which the members and the companies adhere to voluntarily, are extremely low. Not even the cultivation on peat soils is prohibited, nor are highly dangerous pesticides such as paraquat forbidden, or even deforestation itself is forbidden. Only those forests really worth of protection. And what is worth of protection, also this roundtable decides. So I think it's not a big surprise that in the 14 years of its existence, it was found 2002, the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil failed to really address the massive destruction or to end the massive destruction of forests. On the opposite, under the green cover, the destruction of forests has even increased since the founding of the RSPO in between the last 18 years. It was founded actually when more and more NGO reports were published and more reports about the damage palm oil production causes were published. So it was a reaction of the industry to say we take care of ourselves. We don't need any regulation. We don't need governments to set up new laws or anything like that. We can do it by ourselves. So this is. You can say that RSPO is really helping those companies to keep their business, to make it easy for them to source that really problematic raw material palm oil. So still, the CEO of Unilever, Paul Polman, claims Unilever is the largest NGO in the world. And yeah, as Unilever does, many companies, many multinationals and brands claim to be sustainable or environmentally friendly. For example, the huge company Nestlé claims that every cup of the Nespresso coffee does good for the environment and the common good. And with George Clooney in adverts, in Nespresso adverts, telling that Nespresso is really doing good, also traveling to Costa Rica to talk to Costa Rican coffee farmers to show how nice Nestlé is doing. Under this green cover, again, it's going to be forgotten that Nestlé or Nespresso is responsible for 8,000 tons of aluminium waste that Nespresso alone produces with its coffee capsules. But it makes a good conscience to say, well, we take care for the environment and for the people. And it's also difficult to prove what they're doing because they are doing it voluntarily. Also oil companies, for example, the Dutch company Shell advertises with windmills and solar power, even if their main business, of course, is oil. Coca-Cola, the company that pumps entire wells empty, for example, in India, declares itself the savior of the world's drinking water reserves. The seed company Monsanto has claims to have helped 5 million smallholders out of poverty, and describes his business as contribution to all 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So if you look up the Monsanto homepage or the Unilever's homepage or Nestle homepage, you might think you are on the NGO homepage or on the NGO or on the homepage of the United Nations, because they all work visually with this 17 development goals. Monsanto even has a sustainability report. So if you would try it out yourself, just Google the word sustainable, you will get more than 400 million hits, because it's everywhere now. In every product, in every kind of industry, you find the claim that what they're doing, is sustainable. And if you browse through the results, you will find out that the world seems to be saved very quickly, because everything that was once harmful and shameful is now available in sustainable, green, and responsible form. So actually there's no big company today that would not present itself as a world savior, which is an excellent way for corporations to hide their profitable but damaging core business under a green cover, and also with a promise to take care of the problems they cause themselves and they make profit from. They keep politics off their backs, which could restrict profit through regulations and laws. And above all, they sell their customers a clear conscience so that they just continue to consume. So greenwashing is, on the other hand, it's not only cheating on consumers, it's also a very successful form of lobbying. Now, it's one thing for companies to spread lie in order to sell their products. It's called advertising. We know that very well. But greenwashing, and this is very interesting, greenwashing in particular stands up to any enlightenment. So the more harmful the product and the more absurd the associated eco-promise, the more likely it seemed to be believed. Maybe it's because the overwhelming collection of such good news makes one feel good. So it seems we all can take part in a great world rescue if we only choose the product of a company that has nothing else in mind but saving the world. But if you lift this green curtain, you see different things. Global destruction and climate change is progressing rapidly. So just to tell you some numbers and data. Between 1980 and 2010, the annual global consumption of raw materials doubled to 80 billion tons. Every minute, forests are being destroyed in the extension of 36 football pitches. Up to 58,000 animal species disappear every year. The number of hungry people has even risen again to 815 million. Also, 46 million people work as modern slaves, only for example in palm oil plantations. Every day, at least 3.5 million tons of garbage are produced, and 13 million tons of plastic garbage end up in the sea every year. Greenhouse gas emissions are also on the rise, even though the world is trying and flying from conference to conference to claim to want to save the climate. There's one organization called the Global Footprint Network, and they calculate the Earth Overshoot Day every year. And this Earth Overshoot Day is this one day in the year all the world's resources that can be used in a climate-friendly, ecological and socially equitable way within a year are used up. And this day is happening earlier every year. In the year 2000, 18 years ago, this day was on October 8th, which means quite at the end of the year. 2018, this year, it was on August the 1st. So this means the consumption of raw materials and the production of damage is growing rapidly. This also means that for nearly 100 days, it's the wealth and lifestyle is secured by stealing the futures and lives of others, primarily in the countries of the South. From there, a lot of raw materials are sourced, food and products which contain cheap labor also imported, and also the consequences of that way of life and this high level of consumerism is exported in those countries. So those are the first who are affected by climate change and for years, for example, and exploitation as well. So in the current system, exploitation, human rights violations, and the destruction of nature are not avoidable collateral damage, but profit is based on them. Actually, it is really simple, because if companies really make profit with ecologically and socially just economies, how they claim to do, why should they do anything else than that? That would be really easy, and there wouldn't be any necessity for this huge sustainability discussion. How do they succeed? I think it's, on the one hand, because they managed in a quite disturbing way to take over images and language and pictures of the environmental movement. Like I told you, if you look at the homepages of huge multinational companies, you could think it's the United Nations or some other NGO. So what they do is they use the destruction they cause to stage themselves as saviors. And also in the name of sustainability, some of them have even managed to put NGOs in charge to encourage them. You can call it like green fake news, and those green fake news, with those green fake news, those corporations have managed quite good to ensure that the apparently last hope of society seems to be that corporation will change for the better by themselves, if we buy their products, of course. And also greenwashing works very well because consumer societies are happy to hear that nothing has to change, that it's possible to keep that lifestyle, to keep that kind of system with a little ethical consumption. There are, of course, other ways to make changes and to stop green lies. We will have a discussion about that afterwards, of course. But one very interesting process is going on the level of United Nations, which is where a UN binding treaty for transnational corporations and other companies is discussed. And this discussed human rights agreement would make companies accountable and enable their victims, the victims of environmental damage, of human rights violation, even to sue corporations. In believing that the world can be saved by ethical consumption, on the other hand, we would allow companies and politicians also to shift the responsibility to us, onto the really individual. But if you take a closer look, and that's what I try to do with my work and what we also try to show in the film, it's not even possible in the most cases, and it's also quite cynical for us as a consumer to decide between against exploitation or destruction in a supermarket. Like, am I buying child labor today or am I not? So this is quite cynical, and this is not the way how things are going to change, I'm convinced. So to suggest some questions to discuss, and as I also have already have mentioned the binding treaty of the United Nations, because there are really different ways to make companies and also economies accountable. We should shift the questions. We should ask other questions. So in Germany, also in Europe, and the question is, what should I buy? How do I avoid buying things that damage people and environment and climate? But I think the most important question to be asked would be, why is it even possible that products and companies violate human rights and destroy natures? Why is it legal for companies to produce in that harmful way? And how do we force governments to regulate such companies so that we don't even have to think about it, that we can be sure what we buy, all the stuff we need to buy is produced in an environmentally friendly, also in a social just way. And that it is not the exception but the standard. I think this should be the aim. And I'm also convinced that we can't fight for it as consumers, but as citizens, as we have democratic rights as citizens, other than just being in the supermarket. We have only, we have very small choices to make. So yeah, that's the suggestion I would make, and I'm really curious about your questions.
Спасибо большое за ваше выступление. Я полностью согласен со всем, что вы сказали. Мне приходилось критиковать вот тот же Unilever на различных мероприятиях в течение последних 3 лет именно за то, что вы сказали. Я полностью согласен, что устойчивое развитие в нынешнем виде, особенно в ООНовской редакции последних лет, это как бы профанация. То есть это отход от изначальной концепции устойчивого развития, которая была основана на работах группы Медоуза в конце 70-х годов. Начало и конца 70-х годов, пределы роста, вот доклад Римского клуба. То есть это извращение изначальной концепции устойчивого развития, то, что принято ООН, как включен экономический рост в концепцию устойчивого развития. То есть это такое противоречие фундаментальное, которое никак не разрешено абсолютно. То есть это приводит к тому, что вот мы сейчас имеем многие предприятия, которые говорят об устойчивом развитии, а многие откровенно называют это устойчивым развитием бизнеса. То есть не говорят устойчивое развитие в рамках концепции сохранения, просто говорят об устойчивом развитии бизнеса. То есть мы вот имеем именно поэтому эти проблемы. И очень обидно, что, скажем, тот же российский ВВФ в отношении нефтяных компаний разрабатывает стратегию оценки социально ответственного бизнеса, делает рейтинг социальной ответственности нефтяных компаний, но не борется за уменьшение нефтедобычи, а просто проводит рейтинг социальной ответственности нефтяных компаний. Это очень обидно на самом деле. То есть я полностью согласен. Ну, вопросов, в принципе, у меня к вам нет, это было просто фактически как решение, извините.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Just to ask back, by the United Nations, you mean the Sustainable Development Goals, I guess? As you said, it's not the right approach how to do so.
Да, конечно, безусловно, потому что комиссия Брундтланд было принято решение включить экономический рост в концепцию устойчивого развития. То есть этого не было изначально в концепции устойчивого развития, которая была изначально в работах, в документах Международного союза охраны природы изначально, после группы Медоуза. Тогда была концепция устойчивого развития, там не было никакого призыва продолжать экономический рост. Вот комиссия Брундтланд включила этот пункт, и это было совершенно неправильно.
Yeah, that's completely true. It's all about economic growth, and also the companies are involved, and they are not only involved, but they also were involved in this in the process developing those goals. Also, Unilever was, and they play a crucial role in setting up those goals. And I think this is really very dangerous and a real question of that shows how much power those corporates actually have, and they can cover that also behind greenwashing.
Да, спасибо.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for doing a great job. I think that the CEO of Unilever was employed not to be the world better, but to generate the cash flow.
Of course, yeah.
I work in corporate reporting, and I know there is a big pressure on the companies about sustainability, environmental, and so on. and actually company obliged to disclose their initiatives. But I think that we all the core participants, because we would like to enjoy the acceptable price on the foods, and it's very difficult to understand who is responsible. I think that consumers and the people are also responsible for all those acts. And if people refuse for buying the Unilever or Nestle foods, they can vote by their choice and demonstrate their attitude to the. I think that it's very difficult to understand who's responsible.
I think there's not one single entity responsible, but on the other hand, I mean, to say that very hard, what Unilever is selling is crap food. They make huge money with it. It contains fat and sugar. It's colored it's added some chemicals. So this is a very cheap way for processing food, and I don't think it's that they are really cheap, because they are sold for, if you compare it what it's really worth from a nutritional perspective, it's not that price. It's not worth that price. But on the other hand, also the global food system is involved. It's not only that one company. Nestle isn't any better, so there's no difference. And I don't think we would all starve if we don't have this processed food anymore. But there's a whole global food system that those companies profit from, because the prices are very low. And also low food prices have low food prices in Europe or in other countries have a reason, and have also play also a role in keeping the payments low for the people. So there is also an interest to have cheap food to create to ensure everyone can buy food, but we don't have to pay them better money for work. So there are different connection to it, and also with Unilever and other of those huge food companies, they rapidly grow in so-called development countries. They really have huge markets there, and that's not connected to people demanding Unilever food. So my experience, for example, was I did also research in Indonesia myself for a former book. And in all those areas where those huge plantations are, where many different people profit from, being it politicians or companies or retailers or banks or food companies or pension funds, actually, investors in pension funds profit from that system of palm oil. It's not only the food companies. In those areas where you drive through monocultures for hours and days, you don't see anything else than monocultures. People can't. There's no agriculture, no other form of agriculture there anymore. So the people are forced to buy those crap food, those processed food in small shops, because they can't. It's not possible anymore to grow vegetables, for example. So this is a really huge picture, and in my opinion, it's really a question of power. But just a boycott of those products. I mean, we had those boycott of Nestle since the 70s. There were huge boycotts going on. It didn't any harm to Nestle, not at all. And I think it's not how it works. We just don't buy it. And I think many people really actually don't buy it. I don't buy it myself, but this won't be enough to really change that food system. I think the solution and the approach should be to take a look on the global food system, and also to the global agriculture system, and also to this political aspect. Is trade organized? Why are they allowed to produce like that? It's not because they are a bad company or bad people themselves who decide we want to exploit children or we want to damage the climate, but it's a system that ensures very cheap raw material, and this raw material, palm oil, is so cheap because it's easy to cut down forests, because the situation of land rights is quite difficult. It's very easy to exploit workers because they have lost everything in those. They are really forced to work in those plantations. So I think this way to address it with a much bigger picture would be the better approach, instead of looking who is the one responsible, because it's not only one. And of course, we are all part of the system. There's no easy way out for us as well. So that's of course true as well. Yeah.
Здравствуйте. Очень интересная лекция, спасибо. Ну вот у меня такой вопрос. Сейчас основной потребитель вот той продукции, о которой идет речь, он находится в городах. И города постоянно растут. Окружающая территория вокруг этих городов, она не способна производить столько продукции, чтобы прокормить тех людей, которые там проживают. Города выше там, миллиона человек уже не способны кормиться с окружающей территорией. Тем более, что многие города это расположены в таких климатических условиях, где, собственно, продукции не может быть столько произведено в принципе. Вот. И практически, если посмотреть тот ассортимент, который есть в магазинах, он на 90% состоит из продукции транснациональных корпораций, да, пищевых. И продукция пищевая, и продукция там, бытовой химии, там, любая другая продукция, которая в основном потребляется жителями городов прежде всего. Численность населения городской, она постоянно возрастает. И я хотел спросить, а как бы, ну, видите ли вы, какие можно предпринять дальнейшие действия, чтобы вот это население городское, постоянно возрастающее, можно было бы прокормить, да, удовлетворить в его потребительском отношении. Понятно, что потребление тоже надо умерять, сокращать по возможности. Вот. Но что можно предпринять, да, для того, чтобы это население, да, оно могло существовать, питаться более, скажем так, вот, в контексте устойчивого развития. Спасибо.
Thank you. I think that agriculture is really key to sustainable, actual sustainable development. To actually also not only in an environmental friendly way, but also in a social way. I only know best the situation in Germany. In Germany would be capable to produce 93% of all food that would be consumed. That would be possible. This is the official number of the government. It could be there could be food sovereignty to 93% in Germany. But 2/3 of the agricultural land is used for the production of meat that is exported. So to grow corn, to grow wheat, to feed the animals, there are around, I think it's more than 200 million animals in huge production entities, you have to call it like that, that have to be fed with that kind of food, and only 1% of the agricultural land in Germany is used to grow vegetables, for example. Only 1/5 of the wheat that is growing in Germany is used to produce food for people, which makes Germany the second biggest importer of food in the world, which is really, when I read those numbers, I was really shocked, because this shows there would be a possibility if you shift production. It's not only about the production, it's also about where does, for example, the European subsidies go. Do they encourage huge industrial entities of agriculture that produce meat and don't produce food for the people, or can we stick these subsidies to produce sustainably? This would be a way, and many organizations in Germany and also in Europe and also NGO are fighting for this kind of agriculture. There is another number that globally, at least that globally 4 million more people could be could eat and eat better than now if there weren't so many wasn't so many agricultural land in the world used for production of food for animals, and also the production of biofuels. They are a huge part of for meat production. I think it's globally nearly 70%. No, it's 30% of the global agricultural land is used for food production for animals, and nearly 70% of the ice-free land is used for meat production as well. So those are huge numbers. And there is, I think, a way to change that. And this would really change not only it would not only be a change for in environment and climate, but also for the people who want to live from their land, like many do in the south. Also, many people in the countries in the south, for example, Bangladesh, that's where I have done research and experience. Many people come to the huge cities because they're kind of refugees. They are climate refugees who can't live from their land anymore, who lost their land, or who lost their land in land grabbing activities, something like that. So this is, in some countries, also a reason for cities growing. There are many concepts for producing food in cities. This would also be a question: what kind of cities do we want to live in? What kind of mobility, what kind of traffic do we want to have? Do we want to leave all the space we have to cars, or can we instead have huge parks and gardens? That would be also one way to change the global food production. There are many ideas. Also, what is spreading is the idea of community-based agriculture. This is a growing idea, not only in Europe, where consumers and producers work together in communities, so to get rid of that pressure from the supermarket chain, to get rid of the pressure of the price pressure of the food companies, to really produce good food, and to do that in a really democratic way. I like this idea very much, and I also did research in Greece 2 years ago, where there's a growing solidarity movement as a consequence of the crisis, the financial crisis, and those community-based agricultures and those markets without middlemen, where people and producers negotiate prices and how they want to live and produce. They serve hundreds of thousands of people in Greece, and I think those examples might be still small, but they show that it's possible to reach really many people if we work on that.
Thank you for the great lecture. Actually, what I mentioned that the biggest problem in global greenwashing, this is in the most developed countries like United States or Europe.
Of course.
If we look at United States, there is like the biggest numbers of obesity and unhealthy people. They don't have bees and so on. Why we are looking at the problem if we created actually ourselves? Like in Russia, I don't see we don't have this kind of things that we have so many land, we support our local farmers. Only problem we have is the garbage. But what I mean, the people they created these big issues, and I think the most what involved in that this is the government, because the government only wants to make money, but they never thinks about the people, and people they would just stay calm, they stay quiet, and when it became like a biggest issue, now just only people start to talk, and why people never look at it like I don't know 10 years ago, like 20 years ago, why just now, It's very strange for me because this is the biggest issue. What I see in the dynamics, not the people, the countries with not a big economic growth, they caring actually more than the most developed countries.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it is. It's mainly I can speak for Germany, of course. When you look at Germany at the moment, once Germany claimed to be the #1 climate protector country, which it isn't at all. So I don't know if you are aware of the diesel scandal in Germany. So this is a clear example. You could have changed a lot of things with mobility. You could have politics could have chosen to really make a change, to make this industry accountable. What did they do? They said, well, there are people who suffer from bad air. There are people who suffer from being blackmailed by the car company. It's your problem, but we save the car company. So, and how they keep people calm is always by the fear of losing the job, which really prevents people to fight against it, to rise up. But of course, this is one thing I think we should, as citizens, fight for, is that governments take care of, in our interest, not in the interest of any huge companies, but to take care of the people. That would be the much better way. Yeah.
Is it any ways we can force them?
Is it any ways we can force the government to make changes? I mean,
well, of course, I think every social improvement didn't came from above, but was fought for. I think maybe these fights were long ago, but there's a global fight, for example, against coal mining or oil production as well. It's also in Western countries. In Germany, for example, we have huge fights to stop coal production and occupations of the coal mines in Germany, because Germany is one of the hugest polluter in terms of CO2 connected to coal. So I think there's a new kind of social movement even even going on, and many young people are taking part. So there's a moment when I think it is. Time is a really important factor in that, because after this diesel scandal and after the scandal that one energy company in Germany, RWE, we also have those company in the film, just was cutting down a really old forest, and people said, no, that's enough now. That's really enough. You know that the climate change is coming. You know that that we need clean forms of energy, and this is also, I mean, this is politics. So this single company is managing to lobby with lobbyism to get politics to let them do what they want. We don't want that anymore. So those kind of protests is growing in some parts, not in every part, of course, because it's always it's at the same time, it's not only going down, but there's also protests rising, and also you have those kind of protests against mining in many countries of the south, against coal mining in Colombia, for example. Also in Bangladesh, there's a huge protest going on, building one coal plant and also one coal mine. So we don't start by zero. There's already change going on. I hope, at least.
Yeah, I mean, this is amazing that you're marking issue and like doing the researches and talking about that. But there's talk about issues not on there, like you know, what maybe if you have some personal maybe ideas how you can change it, like what would you do? And
I think it's not only about ideas. I think some of the problems are so obvious, and the solution is as well very obvious. If there are too many cars in the streets, we have to think about how we can get the cars from the streets, for a really small example. So I think the important question is who tries to prevent that change, who profits from the status quo, who profits from everything is staying like it is. So those are I think the obstacles, the main obstacles. It's not that that there are not ideas, but I think, and that's why I'm so concerned with greenwashing, because I think greenwashing is one of the main obstacles to real change, because it creates the impression the system is perfect. We just have to change just some little parts of it, then everything is fine, and we invent a new technology or promise a new technology, and the system even gets better. So that's the impression greenwashing creates, in saying the companies change themselves and they are part of the solution, not the problem. So I think the solutions are very often quite obvious, I think. But there are many ideas small ideas on the way to the bigger changes, of course. So, for example, community-based agricultures, repair cafes, for example. I don't know if they're familiar here. This is a huge thing, a growing thing, let's say a growing thing in Germany, because electronic devices, they are produced for not for for eternity, and they are groups gathering together to repair them. So with professionals, of course, because it would be dangerous otherwise, but to say, no, we try to use things much longer. We don't waste them. The same with fashion as well. There are parties to change clothes, stuff like that. So I think those alternatives are already, I think, kind of trained. Yeah.
So thank you so much for your presentation. I'm really interested in this topic. And well, comparing our countries in terms of sustainable consumption, Germany is certainly more developed? And what do you think? If it's possible to adopt some environmental organizations, for example, or systems like food sharing in our country, and what can we do in our everyday life just to reduce such emissions?
I mean, of course, you can not use a car and stuff like that. That is of course one way. But I think it is very important to shift it from an individual perspective to a social perspective, to gathering together to work on change, which is, for example, the repair cafes. One small example, or community-based agriculture would be also an example for it, where you just not end by just choosing between two options, for example, like in the supermarket, or just choosing another, don't know, way of transport or mobility, but also have conversations with people about ideas, about how to move on. I think this is very important, to move on, not to feel alone and not to be alone, and to combine the training of alternatives with political demands and also protests. I think this is a quite good way. And everyone is different. Everyone has a different daily life and job where he can take part in. I think there's it's difficult to make suggestions for everyone, because it really depends, where are you working? Are you working in school? Then you can work with pupils, or at university with students, build up some student groups, something like that. I think this is there are really different options. Depends on the perspective for what you can do. But doing it together would be a way to feel not hopeless, also. To not think, I'm just alone, it's the world is going down. I can't do anything against it. So the more you communicate with people, the more you work on it, I think the more hope you get and the more powerful you feel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your report, and thank you for discussing such very important issues. And you mentioned some international companies that damage environment, use chemicals, but present themselves as eco-friendly. But can you name some international companies, maybe food production companies, which program of sustainable development it really works, and companies that can be a good example for others?
As huge companies all work in the same system, and they would really have a loss of profit if they would really change their complete mode of production. So they aren't one. I mean, those projects, or those green claims, they're not just made up. They are not pure lies. But all they do is, for example, working together with an NGO for a small part, or having any social program anywhere in the world that might exist, but they don't damage their profits. So they don't even they are not even close to their main or corporate core business at all. So those are projects to keep the core business like it is. Because if you when I was to Indonesia the first time, to palm oil, to investigate palm oil, I visited undercover. I visited one plantation with a human rights activist who tries to build unions there, who can fight for better working conditions and better payment, and worker safety. And that was really interesting, because and this would be a way that would change the price for palm oil dramatically, if they would be really paid in a just way, if they would have safety clothes and wouldn't have to pay for it themselves, which is really a scandal. If they would have healthcare, all that kind of stuff. If they would have sick leave and stuff like that, then this kind of oil wouldn't be so cheap anymore. If the indigenous people would have proper land rights and could prevent the companies from just cutting it down, from just evicting them from the forest, this would be another a way to make that would make this oil much more expensive. And it is expensive because it is not the case. So they are all working in the same system and can't really change. They can set up different programs and maybe they work, but it doesn't at all change the core business. But there's of course a difference to local companies, and the difference to local companies, of course, is they have other supply chains. They have local supply chains. They are much more under social control, because you can prove what they are doing. If they doing it, or if they pollute a river, they won't do it, I don't know, at the end of the world. It would be an issue here. So there's a clear difference between the huge multinational companies and also and the small ones. And I think one of the most horrible and sad examples is the incident in Bangladesh, when the Rana Plaza building collapsed, because where many international fashion companies had their work there. They all promised they would take care about social, about environment and social production, and they did. They were part of some. They had a code of conduct, and they had reporting, and they had the TÜV Rheinland, which is a company that is proving such places. They did have set up all that they could do voluntarily, and still that building collapsed, and still they haven't changed very much. So yeah.
Thanks.
Друзья, будут ли еще вопросы?
Да, всем большое спасибо, да, что пришли. Фестиваль еще идет сегодня, завтра и в понедельник, поэтому на сайте ECOCUP.ru можно проверить расписание. Может быть, вам будут интересны еще другие события фестиваля. Будем вас ждать. Еще раз спасибо большое и аплодисменты на сегодня.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was a pleasure discussing with you. Thank you.
Анкеты, кто заполнил, можно просто на случай поставить.
Korean, Polish, to be translated.
Да? Да нет, по-моему, все то же самое. Это просто какие-то дополнительные
decided not to fight with the system, to just try to make their own self-esteem.
There are some, but I know some of those community-based activities, there's also very people it's not a farm actually, it's producing vegetables and fruit. Also there are some in northern Germany, I think there is one farm that tries to be vegan. So also community, there are some. And I also know in Germany, in Bavaria, where I come from, there, in Germany, there's the Farmers Association is really powerful, but not for the local farmers. It's for the big agribusiness, and those are really, really dangerous and lobbyists who really prevent change and also are very powerful at the EU level. They are also responsible for this kind of subsidies going to people. But there are also farmers, and I know some of those organizations which are really interesting. So just they're all farmers, but they have their family homes, and some of them are organic, some of them not. But they try to be part of this movement. We are family. This is a huge movement in Germany. Churches taking part, NGOs taking part, farmers taking part. Also groups like attack are taking part. And this is a growing movement. And there are rallies and demonstrations around the agriculture fair in January in Berlin, where the big business show. And this is growing, so 30,000-40,000 people are on the streets. So I think this is a good sign that people are aware and that they really that they care and they wish for agriculture and for agricultural change. I think this is a good thing. And also this Bavarian association, or not even an association, it's they're working together, they are going to this forum, for example, together. They organize a bus and they try to get into those they made a film, really beautiful, low budget, homemade film about the whole agriculture. But still, there are some as they are mainly farmers learning problems very well. Yeah. So, one former agriculture minister, she said,
more the people in European Union in general, like they're like more acknowledged and informed and involved in the processes which is happening worldwide. That's why I see here comparing Russian society. For most of the Russians, there are Russian families who just maybe trying to survive, looking for a job, so they just don't care. They just need to buy some food.
But actually, also in Eastern Germany, agriculture is done. It's really only the huge companies, also foreign companies that bought huge amounts of land, and there you can see what it does to society. Agriculture is going down like that. There's no job anymore. Huge fields of corn, huge fields of, I don't know, biofuels. And this is really sad. So, of course, yeah, you have this also in Eastern Europe as well. Area. Then the huge companies that come in, Cargill, and that's really sad. And that went very quickly. That should be, yeah, that is different. But yeah, that is what I try to I'm still to do a long-term report on how agriculture in Croatia changes with the new entry. So it was quite a functional system with many small family farms. I mean, it was safe. I mean, we did not become much or anything, but it was safe. And it was, yeah, independent. And we also had those masters. Still, they have those masters. This is so interesting because I never saw this variety of food in Germany. We have to complain.
Yeah.
And this is changing, and this is really sad. Yeah, thank you.
Is there any chance, because we actually missed the movies of it?
I'm sure it will be, I think there will be an online stream one day. The English version not actually yet, because it's also sold out, but there will be. Green live, there will be. German already, we have the DVD, but not in English yet, but there will be. Maybe it's also broadcasted on TV, I don't know.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Мы едем туда на фунды сейчас. Я предлагаю вызывать такси.
Я работаю
И на что ты сейчас работаешь?
Я учились буду работать в английской школе.
А нет, а вот конкретно что сделала на не Москву?
Нет, на Москву.
Одна Москва. Я думала, не Москва, да, это проект.
Не Москва. Нет, я, кстати,